Thank you. First, thanks everybody for coming out tonight. It's an honor to kick off the Wednesday Wellness Sessions for 2022. Happy New Year, and let's make it a healthy and prosperous one with a touch less COVID if we could. Let me share my screen here and see if we can get started. I'm the head of our IHA, the Institute for Lifestyle Medicine. So the William J. Folletti Institute for Lifestyle Medicine was started 3 years ago and dedicated to helping focus on getting to the root cause of what causes illness and helping empower ourselves and our patients to actually get not just absence of disease, but positive wellness, and how we can accomplish that through some basic lifestyle measures. Let's start back in the 1960s. I was the oldest of 4 brothers, and we grew up in a time where, wow, life was great. It was kind of the blossoming of the processed food industry. Boy, we had breakfast cereals and instant breakfast. We had all kinds of convenience foods. And in addition, everybody, a lot of people, I should say, including my mom, smoked cigarettes. That is until 1964, when Dr. Luther Terry, the Surgeon General at the time, came out with a striking report that kind of caught healthcare a bit off guard, because even medical societies endorsed and many doctors smoked. But there was a definite link now between chronic obstructive pulmonary disease and lung cancer. And we realized that because they were related to smoking, they were therefore largely preventable. A great advance in our understanding. And you can see here what happened to lung cancer rates for men. As smoking rates went up and up and up with about a 30-year lag, so did lung cancer deaths in men. And again, in 1964, as the Surgeon General's report led to a decline in smoking rates, with again a lag, there was a decline in rates of lung cancer deaths among men. So you see the importance here. Not only is the area under this curve here represent lives saved from this report, but really the area under this entire curve here representing deaths from lung cancer were in the first place preventable if we had just known in advance that smoking was the chief cause of lung cancer, 9 out of 10 lung cancers. So a great advance in public health and understanding, and really one of the early indications that lifestyle medicine could have a dramatic impact on the health of our people. Well, then by 1990, Dr. Dean Ornish came along and published the Lifestyle Heart Trial in one of the most prestigious medical journals, indicating that our leading killer, that is coronary artery disease, is not only preventable, but reversible. This disease, which kills over 500,000 people every year in our country still, has long been the leading killer. And this was a striking understanding that this disease could be prevented and reversed through some simple lifestyle measures. I will come back to those. Then fast forward to 2015, Dr. Michael Greger came out with his book, How Not to Die, and he helped us to understand that not only heart disease, but all 15 of our leading killers are preventable and in many cases are reversible through some simple lifestyle metrics. So once again, we need to think in terms of how we can incorporate this into our healthcare system. We have some pretty shameful stats, and here's the reason why we need lifestyle medicine. United States healthcare is the most expensive in the world. We spend 3.2 trillion on, put healthcare in quotes because it's really more like disease management, with at best mediocre results. If you look at longevity, the midlife mortality, chronic disease rates, we have some of the worst results. In fact, a recent report showed that of 11 industrialized countries, we came in 11 out of 11th in terms of our healthcare system actually producing what it's supposed to, that is health. In addition, 80% of this excessive spend is spent on chronic diseases that are largely preventable and often reversible. Why is this so? How could we get a healthcare system of this concern? Well, number one is, according to a recent survey, only a quarter of medical schools offer even a single course in nutrition. Doctors simply aren't taught this. And this is, again, a part of where our medical education has evolved. But another big part of that is what pays. In the documentary Escape Fire, featuring Don Berwick, the former head of Medicare and Medicaid Services, he talks about how the average cost of healthcare per person in the US is more than twice the average of the rest of the industrialized world. And a big part of the reason for that is we pay for these end-stage procedures. The average cost at that time in 2015 of a drug-eluting stent procedure, which, by the way, has been shown really not to improve outcomes, versus a cardiac rehab session where you teach a person how not to need a stent, only is reimbursed $100. So where do you think institutions, medical training are going to put their resources? Not that they're not trying to do the right thing, but they're working to get reimbursement for what pays. A good example of where prevention saves is in seatbelts examples. Back in the 90s, as we implemented seatbelt laws, fatality rates from the auto accidents went down. And unfortunately, this prevention doesn't pay. People who were taking care of those folks in the hospitals suddenly didn't have as much to do because seatbelts were saving their lives. So what we need, what we're actually seeing, is a fundamental paradigm shift sweeping across the United States. And this is really put forward by the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. The 6 pillars of lifestyle medicine include healthy eating, physical activity, managing stress, good quality sleep, avoiding risky substances, and social connectedness. Together, these bring forth their mission statement or vision statement, a world where lifestyle medicine is the foundation of a transformed, sustainable healthcare system, where an evidence-based approach to value-based specialty that transforms and redefines and sustains healthcare by treating, reversing, and preventing non-communicable chronic diseases. What that means is we get to the root cause of disease and help prevent it in the first place. And if it already is there, see what we can do to address the root cause and reverse it. Within IHA, we have several providers who are board certified now in lifestyle medicine, and we're leading initiatives to help with both prevention and staying well as reversing disease across our communities. I mentioned Dr. Ornish's work back in 1990. His program is centered around 4 pillars: eating well, move more, love more, and stress less. And in his landmark study, coronary artery disease patients on the program had a 91% decrease in their frequency of angina attacks. That's chest pain due to heart pains in just a few weeks versus 186% increase in attacks in the control group who were just given usual care. So this was so powerful. No medicine, no other intervention in the history of treatment of this disease was so powerful. You'd think that things would change pretty quickly, but once again, reimbursement, education, inertia, what people think they should have are all much more slow to change. In a more recent study, Dr. Caldwell-Esselstyn in 2014 came out with a study of 198 patients, and once again documented with angiography. This is the shadows of a coronary artery of a 43-year-old surgeon from the Cleveland Clinic, showing extensive blockage of this major artery serving the heart. And 3 years later, on his program of healthy eating and lifestyle approach, completely back opened up. So we now have direct evidence that this disease is reversible. In fact, he calls it a benign foodborne illness, which need never exist or progress. One of my patients, Tim, is a good example of this. Tim came in back and he said I could share his story with a pretty kind of common average. His BMI was 27.3, making him overweight but not obese. His blood pressure was borderline, 130/90. His blood sugar put him in a pre-diabetes phase, 104. And his cholesterol was, again, not bad by American standards, kind of average, 206 with a bad cholesterol LDL of 132. Well, I told him, I said, Tim, this may not be bad by American standards, but this is not where you want to be. And it was only about 3 months later that he was at a meeting, as a healthcare consultant, and he began feeling this discomfort in his chest. And the person he was with said, what are you doing? What's going on? He said, well, I noticed when I start doing things, I feel uncomfortable. I can't do what I used to. Well, he ended up in the hospital, and his coronary artery, in his left main coronary artery, which is the one that serves the main part of the heart, was over 90% blocked. This is called the widowmaker for good reason. And Tim changed his diet, his lifestyle, and is now still thriving 3 years later. Let's go back to these pillars of what makes this so powerful. The healthy eating part is understanding that food is medicine. We choose predominantly whole plant-based foods that are rich in fiber, dense in nutrients, vegetables, fruits, beans, lentils, whole grains, nuts, and seeds. We exercise on a regular basis, and we call it physical activity, and activity of all kinds counts. Walking, gardening, push-up, lunges, essential piece of the optimal equation. And then stress can help to motivate us, but it also can lead to anxiety, depression, immune dysfunction. And helping people to manage that stress and cope with it are important parts of the whole picture. Next is substance abuse, avoiding risky substances. We know that for many people, these substances can really drag them down, whether it's drugs, alcohol, smoking. Not finally, but sleep or lack of sleep, poor quality sleep leads to immune suppression and decreased ability to cope and do what you want to do. And then social connectedness is essential to the emotional resiliency, helping people to feel a need to or desire to be together, to support each other. Now, all of these are important, and we commonly try to think, well, which is most important? But they're all important, and they work synergistically to support each other. And so any good lifestyle medicine intervention incorporates all of them. Tonight, because of limited time, we're going to focus mainly on the nutrition side. And a part of the reason for that is that the nutrition part right here is now the leading cause of death and disability in the United States. Back in '93, it used to be tobacco, and followed by diet and activity. And by 2018, tobacco use rates were down, dietary risk and poor food quality was up, and we have that as our leading cause of death and disability now. So with respect to nutrition, I divide foods into 4 categories. You see animal on the left, plant on the right, processed on the bottom, and unprocessed on top. You get the idea here. Down here is a processed food like chicken McNuggets and hot dogs and cheese. Up here, at least, it looks similar to the way nature presented it. And down here, processed plant foods like potato chips, French fries, Captain Crunch, olive oil. And up here, you've got vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and beans. So let's try to analyze and see where and how we can understand what is the optimal human diet if we're trying to prevent and reverse disease. Well, we've got to back up a step and think, what makes a food health supporting? And they're really pretty straightforward characteristics. A food should be rich in antioxidants. They should be high in fiber, alkaline, free of cholesterol, anti-inflammatory, rich in what are called phytonutrients, and balanced macronutrients, that is proteins, fats, and carbs. Let's go through each of those and just compare. I don't want to spend a lot of time on the processed foods because, again, especially with this audience interested in health, we know that many of these are not really food at all, but just food-like substances designed by industry to addict us and bring us in with fat, salt, and sugar. Let's focus instead on this part, which is a common question people have is, well, are we natural omnivores or should we be eating more towards one way or the other? With respect to antioxidants, they've done the study on more than 3,100 foods, beverages, supplements, everything from Big Macs and lentils to broccoli and potato chips were studied. And the characteristics were pretty easily divided by plant and animal-based foods. The mean content of antioxidants in the plant-based foods was over 1,100 units versus 18 for animal, with a max of 289,000 and 100. The plants make the antioxidants to survive that firestorm of photosynthesis. The animals, if they eat those plants, use them up, and then it's not left in the meat, dairy, and eggs for us. You can see it here. Diets composed mainly of animal-based foods are low in antioxidant, while those on plant-based foods are rich due to the thousands of bioactive phytochemicals found in plants and many foods and beverages. Why is this important? Because in the process of extracting energy from food, the basic equation is carbon, oxygen, hydrogen from either fats or carbs goes to water, CO2, and energy. And in that process, though, by oxidizing the carbon, it's messy. These free radicals are formed. Oxygen is so reactive that it makes these nasty molecules with an unpaired electron that go around like a bull in a china shop, causing DNA damage and mutations, which can lead to cancer, proteins denatured and setting up immune response and chronic inflammation. They cause endothelial damage. That's the lining of our arteries and plaque buildup, coronary artery disease and strokes, and cellular damage throughout the body, leading to cellular aging and organ dysfunction. So we have a big 5-star here for rich in antioxidants for the plant foods, especially fruits and veggies, and a big negative for the animal. What about fiber? We all are eating for 38 trillion and one. We say when a woman's pregnant, she's eating for 2, but in reality, we're carrying around a community of microbes, mostly in our colon, that work together with us. We feed them and carry them around, keep them warm, protect them from predators. And in return, if we feed them well, they'll support our immune function, hormone balance, they'll manage toxins, nourish the colon through what are called short-chain fatty acids, lower inflammation, actually produce nutrients, signal satiety to the brain, saying, okay, you ate, and if you included broccoli and lentils and apples in there, then I'm getting my leftover fiber and I'm eating too, so you can be full, versus if all you have is Big Mac and vanilla malt and shake, then no fiber goes down, they don't signal satiety, and people think still hungry. So important part of managing overweight and obesity is lots and lots of fiber. They also aid in nutrient absorption. In contrast, if you starve them, they create inflammation, actually produce toxins, increase the reabsorption of estrogen into the system, increase serum cholesterol, create inflammation and what's called leaky gut, setting people up for many autoimmune diseases. What do they eat? Fiber. This is the non-digestible part of cellulose in plant foods, with the average American only getting 15 grams of fiber a day. Our paltry dietary guidelines suggest we should get at least 30, and only 3% of Americans get even that amount. But your minimum goal should be 60 to 100 or more grams per day. And we know this because areas of the world in the blue zones, this is what they do. Our ancestors, this is what they ate. This is how we evolved, and this is what's best for our whole system, to have plenty of fiber. Where does it come from? Well, this is 2,000 calories worth. You can see the vegetables and beans tend to be the kings and queens, but whole grains and fruits also will give you plenty of fiber, even if you were to eat only that amount. As soon as you get white bread and processed foods, you get very little. And then, of course, zero in olive oil, white sugar, and all animal foods. So here we have the starvation side, and the more you include these zero and minimal foods, the more your microbiome is screaming and not helping, the more you include the foods on the lower part, the greater the nourishment. You can see this in population studies too. As the amount of fiber in the diet goes up from 15 to 60 grams a day, down goes the incidence of heart disease, breast cancer, and diabetes. It's not just that fiber itself is causing this, it's that fiber is a marker for whole plant foods, which have all of the benefits that we're talking about throughout this time. So let's put a big 5-star on fiber, and that's for animals which have zero. What about alkaline? The acid load to our kidneys is largely determined by the type of protein in the food. And animal proteins are high in what are called cysteine and methionine, 2 of the sulfur-containing amino acids. these metabolize to sulfuric acid. And the higher protein animal foods like fish, pork, and poultry have the highest acid load to the kidneys. All of these do, but why is this important? Well, the kidneys are tasked with carefully balancing the pH for the entire body, and they have to therefore excrete that excess acid, and in the process end up having to form ammonia to buffer for their own good. And in the short run, that's okay, but over the long run, that can lead to toxicity of the small tubules called nephrons, and chronic kidney disease is a common result from that. So alkaline from the plant foods, especially fruits, veggies, and beans, and big negative because the animal foods are the opposite. Cholesterol free. We find cholesterol only in animal foods. Egg yolks are one of the most concentrated sources, but all of these have cholesterol. And our goal, the average American total cholesterol levels are 210. Your goal should really be less than 150. This is what is in areas of the world where people don't have heart disease. They don't need coronary care units in rural China where they eat the way that leads to these low cholesterol levels. So cholesterol free, by the way, there's a apparent controversy on this because the industry went to work and designed poorly designed studies showing that people on a high cholesterol diet didn't do any better than people on a very high cholesterol diet. So cholesterol doesn't matter. It was not well designed, created confusion, but the reality is that cholesterol does matter, and we can put a big 5-star and an X on animal food. Anti-inflammatory, and this is critical. And plant foods, we already mentioned, are rich in antioxidants. They support a healthy microbiome, and we're going to come to phytonutrients. But what about animal foods? Actually, the opposite is true. A quarter pounder has an average of 100 million bacteria on it. And these mostly die in cooking, but not before they form what are called endotoxins. These survive cooking, stomach acid, and digestive enzymes. The saturated fats in those meats aid the absorption. These accelerate atherosclerosis, insulin resistance, which is prediabetes throughout the body. The second is arachidonic acid. This is the substance our own bodies use to induce inflammation when you need it. If you step on a splinter or get a scrape, it calls out the troops, brings in white blood cells, blood flow. Inflammation has a purpose, but not if you're eating the messenger for inflammation in the form of animal foods, especially chicken and eggs. So each bite is just sending a message throughout the body to inflame. Next is heme iron. Back in med school, we learned that this was the preferable form of iron because it was better absorbed. Well, we now know that it is a pro-oxidant. It creates free radicals. So not only are they devoid of antioxidants, they create free radicals and such induce inflammation throughout the body. And it's not, and these heme iron then increases each milligram of heme iron in the diet increases the risk of diabetes by 16%, heart disease 27%, stroke, and several cancers. And it's not hard to get a milligram, especially in these shellfish, but also many red meats are between 2 and 3 milligrams. Times those amounts, you can pretty quickly see how this is going to add up to inflammation and chronic disease. The next is carnitine in meat and choline in eggs, which metabolizes in the gut of people who eat these foods to what's called trimethylamine. This is metabolized in the liver to trimethylamine oxide. Again, bad actor. This goes out, stiffens arteries, creates inflammation, and leads on to chronic disease. Here it is from the article in the New England Journal of Medicine. These foods go in the front door, absorption, the liver metabolizes them, stroke, heart attack, and revascularization are the end product of that because of these very pro-inflammatory compounds that are formed. So really, these diseases are not just what happened. We call them diseases of affluence. They're foodborne inflammation. By inflaming the system, all of these diseases get worse or get born and then get fed and foster in a body of chronic inflammation. So anti-inflammatory definitely for plant and pro-inflammatory for the animal. What about phytonutrients? Plants contain over 30,000 disease-preventing phytonutrients, including bioflavonoids in citrus, lycopene in tomatoes, phytates in beans, isoflavones in soy, etc. And these are not optional. these go throughout the body and helping enhance immune function and working on every chemical process throughout. We think that macronutrients, vitamins, and minerals are the key things. We're learning more and more that these are of vital importance, and really the higher proportion of phytonutrients in your diet to total calories, the better quality as far as health promotion. Phyto stands for plant, so these occur only in plant foods, and again, a vital component of a healthy diet with a 5-star in X. Finally, balanced macronutrients. If you look at areas of the world called the blue zones, where people live longest and disease-free, their diets are about 80% complex carbs. Now that's, again, differentiate from refined carbs, which are most American diets, from white bread, cakes, candies, pastries, soda pop, sugar-sweetened cereals. Instead, these carbs come from lentils, broccoli, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and beans. About 10% protein and about 10% fat. And in animal foods, you see, don't have carbs, with the exception of lactose or sugar in milk, but they're very unbalanced as far as the ratio of the amount. Of course, you can't be plant-based in your diet very long before someone asks, where do you get your protein? Many of you probably know the answer to this already. All of these are great quality protein with average amounts as listed, and all 8 of the essential amino acids. So all you really need is, as they say, about 10% of your calories from protein, easily obtained from a variety of plant-based foods. But it's even more important than that, because the type of protein makes a big difference. We already talked about how animal proteins are much more acidic because of the sulfur-containing amino acids. They're much more allergenic. Eggs and dairy are the leading causes of allergy. They're pro-inflammatory. They stimulate a hormone called IGF-1, which feeds cancer, which, if a cancer cell starts, increases its growth rate and ability to spread. Back in medical school, we thought that animal fat was all the concern with respect to these common diseases we see. So industry to the rescue. We got skim milk, low-fat cottage cheese, fat-free ballpark franks, egg beaters. All of these low-fat foods had something in common. That is, they tend to be higher than either sugar or protein. The calories have to come from somewhere. And we then realized that the animal protein itself is also not healthy. So we didn't do ourselves any favor in making that shift, as several cancers, osteoporosis, chronic kidney disease. And we now recognize that animal protein independently increases cholesterol in the bloodstream, so it contributes to these as well. So in this study, middle-aged respondents with a higher protein intake had a 75% increased risk in overall mortality and a 400% increase in cancer death during the following 18 years. And these effects were abolished or attenuated if proteins were from plants. So we see that the animal proteins are really not healthy for us as a take-home message. What about the fats? We already talked about animal foods are the only source of cholesterol. This waxy fat clogs the arteries and can create increased risk of high blood pressure. It also can feed cancer cells, especially breast. Animal fats tend to be higher in saturated fat, much less in plant foods, with the exception of the tropical oils. Watch out for coconut and palm oils, mostly in processed foods. These trans fats, too, are the ones that the FDA banned because they were recognized as both cancer and heart disease risk. They can't use them anymore in French fryers, but they do naturally occur still in animal foods. And finally, the animal foods tend to contaminate heavy metals and contaminants because they're higher on the food chain. So plant fats tend to be a much healthier source of fat from nuts and seeds, whole grains, and beans as the main sources. And then finally, carbs. As I mentioned, most animal foods, eggs and meat, have no carbs, and the milk has sugar or lactose. They have no fiber, which is a form of carb, and the lactose in milk actually metabolizes the galactose, which they use in laboratory rats to induce premature aging. So you want the carbs in a complex form, high in fiber, with no lactose and smaller amounts of galactose if you want the optimal source of carbs. And finally, before we come to our final piece, Another emerging area of resource, or what we're learning, is that the contaminants from various infections, and we all know about foodborne illness like salmonella and E. coli that comes from foods. These originate in the animals, of course, because spinach doesn't poop. We're just learning about a host of additional ones. For example, the bovine leukemia virus gets into the milk and meat of infected cows. In the United States now, it's virtually all meat and dairy samples that have this virus. Now, we used to think, well, so what? It's a bovine virus and it causes leukemia in cows, but not for humans. We now, though, have direct evidence by looking at the DNA in breast cancer cells and find that DNA from these bovine leukemia virus stitched into there, indicating that as many as 37% of breast cancer deaths may be attributable to bovine leukemia virus exposure. This is uncommon in our understanding. For example, cervical cancer is caused by the human papillomavirus. The AIDS virus can cause several cancers, and by creating DNA damage, this virus appears to have that same risk for us as well. So balanced macronutrients and some great types and amounts in plant foods, and then unbalanced for animal foods. Are we noticing a pattern here? Is it just a coincidence that these desirable characteristics of health-supporting foods are prevalent in plant foods and quite the opposite in animal? No, this is how most humans have eaten for most of history. In fact, if you go to most areas, as I mentioned, rural Africa or China, still most are on 90 to 95% plant-based diet. Our ancestors may have had an occasional hunt or kill, but plants ran a lot slower than animals. So the vast majority of their diet was this. That's what we evolved on. And just like any animal, that's what we therefore thrive on. This whole food plant-based diet then becomes the cornerstone of a lifestyle medicine approach to preventing and in many cases reversing the most common diseases I see in my office every day. The American College of Lifestyle Medicine has a good tip sheet for getting started on a whole food plant-based diet, and a new version of the plate instead of the My Plate from USDA, which is heavily influenced by industry, half fruit and vegetables. Plant proteins include beans, nuts, and seeds, and whole grains, and make up the rest with herbs and spices. So what does all this mean for people with an interest in optimal health? Well, this is Karen. She's one of my patients who attended a talk much like I am doing now for you. And she decided to go for it. She lost 34 pounds in 10 months. And her hemoglobin A1C, which is a measure of diabetes control, greater than 5.7 is not normal. Greater than 7 is significantly out of control. And she was 8.6, but in a course of just months, she came down to normal levels on her diabetes measure metric. This is Antoine. Back in 2015, his hemoglobin A1C was 11.7, significantly out of control. His fasting blood sugar should be less than 100. It was 287. Cholesterol should be less than 150, as I mentioned, and triglycerides 150. Microalbumin is a measure of kidney strain. Greater than 30 means his kidneys are straining under the effect of diabetes. And it had been this way for more than a year, in spite of oral medications. I said, Antoine, you got to either start insulin or go on a whole food plant-based diet. He said, Doc, don't like needles? I'll do the diet. Well, he came back just 4 months later. His A1C was normal. His fasting blood sugar had dropped to almost normal. His cholesterol almost 100 points. His triglycerides almost 600 points. And his microalbumin to a comfortable normal now. This is the power of changing and getting rid of the root cause. Well, here he is 4 years later, down 30 pounds and feeling better than ever. But what's going on here is that in type 2 diabetes, insulin, which is a hormone from the pancreas that helps move sugar from the bloodstream into the cells, becomes ineffective. We call that insulin resistance. The sugar then builds up in the bloodstream, and the cells are starving in the face of plenty. And this is why complications of diabetes are so prevalent, from heart disease to kidney failure to blindness and amputations. The cells are not able to function because they don't get the energy they need. What's gumming up the locks there, preventing that insulin from working, is called intramyocellular lipid, or fat inside the muscle cells, which interferes with that insulin signaling process. In particular, saturated fat it seems even worse, mostly from these animal foods. So if we look at per capita chicken intake, back when I was born, 10, 12 pounds a year, then came the Colonel and a bunch of others, and we now have over 50 pounds of chicken per person per year. Meanwhile, they've obesified chickens. They're 4 times the size. They get into market in half the time, so their profits are up 800%. But the amount of saturated fat and total fat in this chicken breast of 2 to 3 grams versus over 20 in this one is leading to insulin resistance and diabetes. Similarly, cheese, which used to be small amounts per person per year, is now over 33 pounds with pizza and Pizza Hut. All these restaurants leading the way. Cheese is 70% fat, high in saturated fat, and we see an epidemic of diabetes just growing to our country. And a key take-home point, Ben, is that because of the amounts people are eating and the high fat content of these foods now, these are key drivers of our diabetes epidemic. So many people think that sugar causes diabetes. Now, it certainly makes it worse, and excess sugar can cause excess fat weight, which can then turn around and also inhibit insulin. So that is a part of the cause, but the key underlying cause is the fat from these animal foods. Dr. Barnard has a great book for any interested in reversing diabetes, Neil Barnard, and program for helping to see that you don't have to live with this disease. And then next is George. George was 83, and he came in just beaming one day. He said, "Doc, I watched that Forks Over Knives movie, and I went plant-based 4 months ago. I feel great." He said, "All that digestive problem's gone. My arthritis feels better." Well, look at George's numbers, too. He came down from obese to normal weight. His blood pressure on medications came down to normal. His bad cholesterol dropped almost 70 points. His good cholesterol went up, and triglycerides dropped. He was on 2 medications and now none. And most importantly, his vitality and feeling of well-being had improved dramatically. So hypertension in usual care is viewed as epidemic, with over half of Americans now having it by the new definitions. It's viewed as a disease. We commonly treat it with 3 or 4 meds. Fair effectiveness. That's why we need 3 or 4 meds, sometimes 5 or 6. We monitor and get office visits with moderate cost, and complications of stroke and chronic kidney disease are very common. In plant-based healthcare, where we're treating the cause, we find very rare incidents of high blood pressure. It's viewed as a symptom when it does occur, treated with a whole food plant-based diet with excellent effectiveness. You don't need to monitor or pay for meds, and complications are very low. I look at this with respect to thinking of root cause. We were in Hawaii a while back, and there's this lookout on the eastern side of Oahu with this amazing tree. Look at that root structure. This tree came down, and these roots go deep, and they form the basis for an amazing architecture of tree above. In contrast, down on the beach, there was a tree that had been deprived of soil and nutrients and water, and this is what it looked like on top. So you can think of the tree as thriving in healthy soil, which is moist with generous nutrients, not compacted so water can get in, versus unhealthy soil where the tree doesn't grow as well. Well, the same thing happens with humans. If you start down here with a healthy lifestyle that has rich antioxidants and supports a healthy microbiome, is alkalinizing, and has balanced macronutrients, you get strong blood flow and low levels of inflammation, healthy organs, and vitality, positive wellness, freedom, and independence. In contrast, most people have a diet that's 56% processed foods, 33% animal foods. That's the average American. Sedentary lifestyle, isolation, and chronic stress, leading to oxidative stress, insulin resistance, low blood flow, and chronic inflammation, organ dysfunction, fatigue, heart attacks, strokes, death. It's really quite sad, because by switching from here to here, people have so much more opportunity to grow their bodies in an environment that supports health. Here it is back on hypertension. How many times have you heard that a heart attack, a stroke, or kidney disease was caused by high blood pressure? Well, yes, that's the immediate cause, but what about down below the line here? The blood pressure is high because the artery walls are stiffened and they're not helping the heart to pump. From damage to that lining that can no longer perform or produce nitric oxide, from chronic inflammation, from toxins and oxidative stress, saturated fat, animal protein, and processed foods. So instead of stopping here and just treating with medicines, we go down here and say, let's get rid of the cause of this high blood pressure so that we don't get these consequences. Now back to the tree, this is how we see then the root cause assessment. So a common question next is, how whole food plant-based do I have to be to get the benefits? And the answer is that, and also, is it true that there are no bad foods, only bad diets? Well, if you think of the percent of calories whole food plant-based, and again, this becomes a marker for fiber, phytonutrients, balanced macronutrients, anti-inflammatory, all the things we think of. The standard American diet is pretty much as bad as it gets. Only 11% whole food plant-based, 32% animal, and 57% processed foods. We'll put that down here with the SAD for standard American diet. In contrast, the power plate put forth by PCRM or American College of Lifestyle Medicine is over here in the 95% plus range. Now, there are a lot of in-betweens here. You can see the USDA saying, hey, you should at least come halfway and eat more fruits and vegetables. And that will get you to a later, slower progression. You've got DASH and Mediterranean diets, Pritikin diets. So it's a continuum along the way here as you move towards more optimal diet. And as you get more percent plant-based, down goes the risk of chronic disease. You can see this in population studies, the Adventist Health Study, body mass index measured for obesity and overweight. As you have less and less animal products, down goes the incidence. Same with type 2 diabetes prevalence. General principles are, though, that this is not all or nothing. There's no threshold effect. Any amount gets you benefit. And the more you do, the greater your gain. Also, the earlier you start, the better, but it's never too late, as in George's situation, to begin to make changes that will dramatically affect your current well-being and your future you as far as well-being. I like this graphic from the book You Staying Young, where we most all start out with quality of life that's high, maybe an acute illness or so. But then, unfortunately, about middle age, most people start heading down this path of obesity, blood pressure, diabetes, bam, dead at the age of 73 of a heart attack. What instead, if you could follow this line and make your last years healthy and active? 103, you get struck on by lightning on the golf course, you still end up here. There's no getting out of death, but how much better to have a life, a quality life with longevity as well. And it kind of the answer to how plant-based and how much you want to devote to lifestyle medicine is, where do you want to be on this curve? The standard American is this way. Kind of going halfway may put you here, and going all in may give you the optimal odds. It's all about risk too. It's no guarantees on any of these. The story of my Uncle Don for a second. He was everybody's favorite uncle. This was a picture 6 years ago on the 4th of July with his son Scott, and my wife and I. And unfortunately, 3 months later, Uncle Don was dead from colon cancer. At the last Plant-Based Prevention of Disease conference, Dr. Stephen O'Keefe from the University of Pittsburgh concluded that a change from a Western diet to a plant-based fiber-rich diet has the potential to reduce the incidence of colon cancer in Western countries 20 to 40-fold. Not 20 to 40%, but 95%. Very similar to how, if nobody smoked, we'd have 90% less lung cancer. If nobody ate the way that creates colon cancer, they wouldn't be getting it as much. So it's very personal for me, and I hope there won't be, that this talk will inspire you and others to help the future Uncle Dons not to have that fate. Of course, screening is also important, but even better is not to get it in the first place. Next, for athletes, I encourage really everybody to watch the documentary Game Changers. This is a James Cameron movie. He did Avatar and Titanic, very well done and available on Netflix now. All of these pro-inflammatory components in meat, dairy, and eggs stiffen tissues, decrease blood flow, impair repair, increase time needed for recovery. So it's no wonder that athletes now are switching to a whole food plant-based approach to get the rich micronutrients and anti-inflammatory nature that helps them perform better in both endurance and strength and agility sports while maintaining their stamina and well-being. So the bottom line then is eat as if your health and your life depend on it, because they do. And some few examples of some things that I like to eat. This is my breakfast. Start with some steel cut oats and then add some berries, ground flaxseed, which is high in omega-3 fatty acids, pumpkin pie spice, cinnamon, and turmeric add anti-inflammatory compounds and phytonutrients, and a little splash of your favorite plant-based milk. It's like dessert for breakfast and rich in anti-inflammatory oxidants and fiber, lowers cholesterol. Lunch can be a group of vegetables with some whole grain breads, toast, or quinoa. You see the colors and flavors. We commonly make various lentil or minestrone soups. We still like to grill, just not with the animal foods. Pineapple and portobello mushrooms are especially good. Corn on the cob, miso soup, and all these rich, flavorful plant-based foods that are tasty and healthy can be what help you to thrive. Finally, I just want to mention a couple other quick issues. Is that we live in this very thin part of the earth called the biosphere, within which all known life in the universe exists. And if the earth were the size of a basketball, this would just be the thickness of a sheet of plastic. And we are abusing it, overusing water resources, polluting, putting too much carbon, and leading to climate change. Well, every day, whole food plant-based eating not only helps you for better health, it saves 1,100 gallons of water, 45 pounds of grain that can be used to feed people, 30 square feet of forest, and the Amazon's being destroyed at an alarming rate, 10 pounds of carbon dioxide in one animal's life. Speaking of that last one, people see this on the grill and forget that it comes from these sentient beings whom we share our planet and have the capacity to feel pain and suffering. So in supporting your own health and the health of the planet, you're also helping our fellow creatures. So additional resources are out there, pbnsg.org, Nutrition Facts is Dr. Michael Greger's work, who I said wrote you can push a screenshot here if you want and look these up. PCRM, Dr. Barnard's work. Again, some great resources, much more than when I first started doing this. And I recommend everybody watch Forks Over Knives as a starter. Dr. Michael Greger wrote How Not to Diet. It's probably the best that I've seen, evidence-based, nothing to sell, just that background on how to prevent or reverse our 15 leading killers. And his website, nutritionfacts.org. Finally, as we're thinking about the why and then the how, the Plant-Based Nutrition Support Group is a great nonprofit group started here in Michigan and now international with over 10,000 members, where they have guest lecturers, cooking classes, support services, and small group meetings that are all virtual now. So look up pbnsg.org. And then our colleagues over at Rochester Lifestyle Medicine have put together a great Jumpstart program. A lot of people think, well, okay, it sounds good. How do I get started? This teaches, once again, not only the why, but the how. How do I cook without oil? How do I chop? How do I make it taste good? How do I stick to this? And the Jumpstart program's available at rochesterlifestylemedicine.org. Here's some example, some of my patients who did that program with a cholesterol drop in just 3 weeks on the program from 250 to 170. Here's one that went from 263 to 198. And these are not just select one. The average drop in cholesterol for people with high numbers can be 40 to 60 points in their program. Weight also drops. One last thing before you go out and hit your friends and family over the head with this and try to grab their chicken away. Remember, there's no love sincerer than the love of food. So go easy. It's better to demonstrate it by practicing great health yourself and then having people ask you, wow, you look great, what are you doing? And share from your experience than it is to try to tell them that their food is killing them. People don't react well to that for some reason. Well, maybe the love of a grand puppy dog is really good. This is Bella. It's also nice when a carnivore loves its food instead of taking it down. And final quote, when you have your health, you have 1,000 dreams. And when you don't, you have just one. Yeah, it's a great question. In addition to the documentaries I mentioned, there are many great books out there. And the How Not to Die is probably the best why book, but it's got a companion cookbook called the How Not to Die Cookbook. Dr. Greger has went on from sharing sort of why this is all so. And actually, the second half of How Not to Die also has a little more detail about what to shop for, how he cooks, what he does. And then his cookbook came out. So that series is great. Forks Over Knives also has a great set. If you go to forksOverKnives.com, they've got a great set of resources, including a cookbook and the family cookery book that come out. Back when I started down this path in 1977, there was very little. But all you have to do now is Google whole food plant-based, and you'll see dozens and dozens of books. And I'm sure that's part of where this question comes from. Where do I start? But those are two great resources. In addition, if you go to PBNSG, Plant-Based Nutrition Support Group, they've got a cookbook and a lot of good resources. Another one, Chickpea and Bean. Someone asked, I saw, can you put back up the slide with the resources? They didn't quite get a screenshot. So I'll put that back up. Yeah, good question. All mammals, of course, start out with milk as infants, whether it's a dolphin, a rat, a giraffe, or a cow, or a human. That's the ideal food for infant mammals. And you never really would think about giving goat's milk to a dog. It's not designed for that. So never in nature does it cross over species. The second thing that's rather absurd about the idea of either goat or cow's milk is that no other species drinks milk after infancy. Milk is, again, very little fiber. It's ideally designed to turn a 100-pound calf or a small goat into a large goat as fast as possible so they can survive that youth time of age. So no better. It's got no phytonutrients. It's high in lactose or milk sugar. And is high on the food chain without the nutrients that people really need to thrive. Let's say fish is less worse if you're going to eat meat. Fish, with respect to heart disease, because the saturated fats are a big part of heart disease, and that's our leading killer, and fish tend to have healthy fats, including the omega-3s, it's less worse. But again, think about the characteristics that make foods desirable. High in fiber? No, fish has zero. Phytonutrients? Zero. Antioxidants? Very little. Balanced macronutrients? No, mostly protein. And remember, fish was the most acidic of that. So it's hardest on the kidneys in that respect. Fish also, unfortunately, is very contaminated. Whether it's especially farm fish, but even deep water fish now, we've so thoroughly polluted our oceans that PCBs, mercury, and heavy metals are ubiquitous in fish now. So I do not recommend fish. And again, if someone has to or really wants to have meat, or they're making transition, fish is certainly better than red meat or chicken or pork. Wow, I love this question because in reality, there's only about 6 different kinds of meat. And unless you find a way to disguise it, I mean, no one picks up a chicken and takes a bite out of it, or grabs a fish from the lake and just starts eating it. And real carnivores do, bears and bobcats do, but not humans. You have to first kind of fillet it and cook it and put it with spices or flavorings or barbecue sauce or other. So you use processing and then plants to disguise it, to make it so it's even palatable at all. In contrast, there are over 100 kinds of vegetables, hundreds of kinds of fruits, dozens of different whole grains. And if you haven't explored quinoa and freekeh and buckwheat and all of these grains, and then dozens of kinds of legumes and beans and peas, lentils, hummus, and soy, and then thousands of different spices, and literally millions of ways of combining all those. So that's the key thing, is most people get into a rut having about 5 or 6 different meals that they just get used to. And once you start breaking out of that mold and exploring the huge abundance of flavors and colors and textures that the plant kingdom offers, you find a whole new world of excitement in eating. And indeed, they look at and compare the persons, people who are on a plant-based diet versus omnivores, and those plant-based who are not heavy in fat, salt, and sugar, that's dulling down their taste buds, actually find more interest, more pleasure in eating than those who get stuck in that rut. Quick example, back when we were kids, I mentioned we ate horribly. Now I pick up a ripe peach and it's like, wow, how did they do that? They didn't make those when I was a kid. Well, they did, of course. They were probably even sweeter then, but my taste buds have changed. So you get more pleasure from foods that are suddenly the same foods they were, but now your own taste buds are not dulled down by the fat, salt, sugar, and processing that the food companies have gotten us all so used to. So yes, thank you for that question. I never get bored, and I can't say that I know any of my plant-based friends that do either. Yeah. First of all of the plant-based milks are healthier than any of the animal-based milks, just out of the gate. And within the plant-based milks, there are differences. The soy has more protein if someone in older years or has a certain disease where they might need more protein, they might prefer soy milk. But they're all sort of processed plant foods, which are better than the milk type, but don't overdo it. They're good on your cereal or to use in some baking or your plant-based pancakes. You can put them on your oatmeal as a splash for flavoring. A little bit in a smoothie can go a long way. But don't just sit there and drink your plant-based milks, because they are processed. It's better to eat the oats, to eat the soybeans, to eat the real food than it is to process it into a milk. So yes, choose one that you like. Some people say, well, I tried soy milk, I don't like it. But there are many different kinds of milks, from hemp and oat and soy, and then within those, many flavors within those. So it's find one of the 100 that you see on the shelf there and find something you like that you can use for those purposes. Excellent question, and answer emphatically yes. There are multiple studies now demonstrating that plant-based diet and other lifestyle metrics, including social connectedness, adequate sleep, and exercise, allow the brain to function better. The brain is an organ like any other, and it works through blood flow, and it's especially susceptible to inflammation. Part of the reason for that is that the brain may only be 2% of our body weight, but can consume up to 25% of the energy. So all of that oxidation, extracting energy from food, leads to a lot of free radicals. So the brain, more than any other, needs a rich supply of antioxidants and anti-inflammatory components going to it in order for it to function well. If instead it's compromised in blood flow through narrowed, hardened arteries, if it's got a large number of contaminants, if it's not getting the short-chain fatty acids from the microbiome, in particular butyric acid, which helps it to to function and induce satiety, then it doesn't work well. And depression, anxiety, focus, concentration are common natural consequences of that. And intervention studies now taking people with depression, ADHD, or early stage Alzheimer's are beginning to show very good results for people to help turn those things around. One comment on Alzheimer's, there's a great book called The Alzheimer's Solution by Drs. Dean and Ayesha Shirzai. I've got it over on my shelf here, but just look up the Alzheimer's Solution book and Dr. Shirzai out of California. They're a husband and wife neurologist team. And by the way, you cannot reverse Alzheimer's once it's set in place, but we have the keys to prevent the vast majority of Alzheimer's through lifestyle metrics. Again, it's more than just diet, but their book is an excellent way of anybody who either's got a family history or seen somebody or doesn't want this for yourself in your elder years to prevent the onset of this very devastating and all too common disease. So yes, thank you for that question. The brain definitely functions better in a healthy, optimal food environment. You know, our ancestors lived in a time where there were no processed foods, and unless they lived near the sea, there wasn't much access to food with salt in it. Natural foods do have some salt, and our bodies need that. So fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and beans have all that we need. But because it wasn't very prevalent in foods, our tongues actually have receptors for salt. Our brains are stimulated by salt. It too is one that we have cravings for because that helped our ancestors to survive. Those that had that hardwired in did better and passed on their genes. It's just basic natural selection. So industry has taken advantage of that and added cheap salt to almost everything, creating addictions and unhealthy patterns for us. When you have excess salt in the diet, it leads to fluid retention, increases risk of high blood pressure, which if you look at the downstream costs of that from strokes, heart attacks, and chronic kidney disease, is one of our leading killers. So salt is definitely related to high blood pressure, certain cancers, especially stomach cancer, and what often comes along with it too, because it's by definition, it comes in processed foods. Natural foods don't have high amounts of salt or sodium. You want to keep it down. General recommendations are under 1,500 milligrams a day, and it's probably better to be in the 1,000 milligram. But unless you have diseases, don't get obsessed about it. You don't have to go overboard. But you pick up a can of Campbell's soup, it's already got 800 in one serving, and there's 2 servings per can. You can see that this is really overdoing it. So yes, limit your salt, but don't get obsessed about it. There are worse things. Yes, great question. One of the things is that, and you can see I'm slender myself here, we find that as you go plant-based, the calorie density of those foods is less, so you get to eat more. You know, people always wonder, how do I have a huge salad and a big bowl of soup and then I go back for seconds? How do I stay so slender eating so much? Well, because you don't have so much sugar, oils, animal foods, and processed foods that are super calorie dense, you get to eat more. Now, you will want, because you're, again, already slender, you want to support your bone health, you'll want to eat more calorie dense foods than average, including sweet potatoes, whole grains and quinoa, your beans, lots of different kinds of beans and legumes and hearty soups and stews. You want to have some avocado. You can afford more nuts and seeds and nut butters. Put them right in your smoothie. You can have a little more of the processed plant milks in your smoothie or on your cereal to make it a little more calorie dense. So you're right. While most people in the world are trying to, watch how much they eat or portion size or amount, we in the plant-based world get to eat more, but of the right things. And that natural calorie density and our satiety mechanisms that are designed for that will kick in and help us to go to the right weight we should be. One quick thing on osteoporosis too. There are many factors related to that, including genetics, smoking, lack of exercise, and diet. And a lot of people think the diet means, oh, you're not getting enough calcium, you need to drink more milk. And that's, again, a dairy industry marketing plan rather than reality. It's not a calcium deficiency disease. What happens is several factors, and again, pay attention to weight-bearing exercise, adequate sleep, and adequate amounts of high-quality phytonutrient-rich foods, and vitamin D. We don't get enough sun in Michigan, so make sure if you're living here year-round, to take a vitamin D supplement, or if you choose not to, at least get your level measured and make sure you're okay on that, because that helps with calcium absorption. But you get all the calcium you need from beans and greens. Just remember those two words. Green leafy vegetables and beans and legumes are your friendly sources of calcium that come along with goodness. And in contrast, the animal proteins actually push calcium out of the system. So by limiting your animal proteins, you're going to help your osteoporosis as well. Yeah, it's also an excellent question. It's not, and if you've known anybody who's tried to give up smoking, you know that it's not for lack of desire, that they want to do this, but the power of that is so strong. And in many ways, fat, salt, sugar, and calorie-dense foods from animal foods have a similar draw for many people. That sugar stimulates dopamine in the brain, and when it's deprived, it calls for more by whatever means necessary. So several things you can do, though. One is to find substitutions. So instead of that Milky Way bar, see if at first you can find a granola bar that may still have some sugar, but not as much. Transition foods, and then work your way to fruits or to smoothies. Find a way to substitute so that you're not just giving this up and you have nothing there, but replace it with something healthier. The second is it takes about 2 to 3 weeks for your taste buds and your brain to change. But you do have to give it that time. So many people after a week throw in the towel and say, hey, I just can't stand it anymore. And they go back to it and then all the more. And then suddenly those Girl Scout cookie boxes are disappearing by the box. And you want to make sure that you're giving yourself the time. And that's where the 15-day jumpstart through Rochester Lifestyle Medicine is helpful, because it gives you that time you need to change and actually start desiring these real foods as much as you did the ones from before. And then thirdly, make sure to make your environment and have your friends help support you. I tell people, make your decisions once a week on your grocery list rather than every day in your kitchen. If you're up now and starting to feel a little hungry, and you go to your kitchen and it's all filled with potato chips, Milky Way bars, and bugles, that's what you're going to eat. Chef AJ says that if it's in your house, it's going to be in your mouth. Instead, if you go over there and it's filled with some rice cakes and lentil cakes and apples and fruits, a little hummus and some whole grain crackers, that's what you're going to have at that time. Now, granted, nothing keeps you from driving to the 7-Eleven and getting that mixed Slurpee and Milky Way bar, but make the right thing the easy thing to do. And then talk to friends and family, just like you'd coach someone who's trying to quit smoking, to say, hey, I'm here for you. Let me know how I can help. And say, hey, I'm really trying to get healthy. And if you want to eat those things, that's good, but please don't offer it to me. Don't make it me wrong for wanting to do right by myself. And if they care about you, if they're really friends and family, they'll support you in that. And that connection, that support, that community of that really does help you as well to get over these addictions. And then finally, keep the end game in mind. Keep that picture of where you want to be, whether it's, I just turned 66 and I like rollerblading and skiing in the mountains and going on the flyboard. I like to boogie board and be healthy. And I just keep that in mind. If I get that craving to eat something I shouldn't, I say, no, that's not really compatible with where I want to be in my vision. And that helps me too. And for many people, that can help them to get over that hump and do what they know they want to do. Yes. These are what we call transition foods. Again, they're less worse than the real thing because they don't have the animal proteins and many of the um, uh, carnitine, choline, heme iron, arachidonic acid that's in there. But they're still heavily processed in many cases, ultra processed plant foods. So they're down in that lower white quadrant of my list of foods things. And if that helps people, though, to be able to have a substitute to kind of get away from the real thing first and then gradually have less of that, or still have some, on occasion, just don't overdo it, then that's okay. Some are better or worse than others, though. The Impossible Burger and the Beyond Meat Burger are specifically designed to taste as close as possible to a real hamburger. And so they've got 12 grams of saturated fat from plant-based sources, but they are not healthy. In contrast, there are many grain burgers or bean burgers that are just grains, beans, vegetables, and some ways of holding it together that are quite healthy. So you can find within those categories better and worse ones as well. You can also, make your own with some oats and some tofu and some grains, a few walnuts. Make your own burgers, and there are many good recipes for that as well that come out even better. But yes, good question. These can be good transition foods, but don't get stuck there eating just as much as you did of the other thing. They are less worse, but not optimal if that's what you're looking for. Out there now, and I really appreciate you all taking your time this evening to spend with us and to really think about investing in your health, because I just see it every day in my office. People who either are still vibrant and healthy well into their 60s and 70s, enjoying life, or those that maybe in their 40s and 50s and are already strife with chronic disease and multiple medications. The good news out of all this is that that's not just a matter of random chance or genetics. It's largely a choice that you can make to choose health, to be on that path of longevity and vitality for the long run. So thank you all for taking your time this evening. I wish you great health in 2022. Stay COVID free, and we'll see you on the next time.